Hello once again, everyone. And now that Yeehaw is done and dusted and was awesome, and I'll be putting up some content from that soon, and we're entering into the holidays, I'm going to kind of slow down video production for a while. Partially this is because the guys that I have help me out with this are busy with their own things, taking a break after a very, very good year of, sword stuff. And also because I'm kind of busy enjoying the holidays myself. So you may not necessarily get as many videos as normal. I will still try to put out at least one a week. Either way though, this one is an idea that I've had for a while, and particularly after observing how things went in both the Bad Wars scenario and as well the Totentons at Yeehaw, I figured now is a decent time to talk about it. Not to mention as well, since I have quite a few newer students who are moving up from the open classes into now doing more full body work and against people of various systems. And so what this is meant to be is, this is just, in essence, a basic longsword system. Now, what I mean by basic is, this is meant to be relatively non-stylistic. It's meant to be just a handful of rules that you can follow, and in general, is kind of what I do as my most default level. Without adding anything extra to it, this is what got me through a decent amount of my early HEMA career, and I still fall back on parts of it, both in a teaching/training methodology, as well as in regards to, I notice it more in my students when I am fighting them, and now that they're doing so, I can then start working around it, which is good, because especially when you're fighting someone more experienced, it can feel like, oh, I can do no right. Odds are it's that you're doing right, and your opponent is able to do more right, which is an excellent thing. But either way, and I'll probably be doing this for a couple of different weapons, but today, we're tackling longsword, because let's be honest, most everyone does longsword. So firstly, we have three categories of guards that we're going to be taking. We have powerful guards, we have point forward guards, and then we have low guards. Those are the three kinds, and they're generally along these three levels for this. So a powerful guard is one that you can cut from that loads you up. A point forward guard is one that's more defensive and or, not just defensive in regards to it, you defend with it, but more in regards to it threatens extension. And then a low guard is one that opens you up. Now, there are a couple different styles of guards that we're going to do here. We'll start from the bottom up. So the low guards, these are meant to only be taken when you are specifically inviting an attack to hit you, or you are out of distance. So what I mean by that is you should not be here intending to attack. Do not attack out of these low guards. Only do this if you want the person to come at you first. Now these low guards have the danger of you will have to parry first, which if you're ready to do, is a good way to get things going. You can also take these while out of distance or when you don't want to betray your intention. The low guard that we're going to use is called Iron Gate. Now this is a name that I've decided to give it because most of these, they have comparable names in the various systems that we're doing. I'm giving them simple English names. Iron Gate is a pretty good one. Iron Gate for this will be defined as my hands are uncrossed in the space between my feet, regardless of which foot is forward. So what that means, it's still Iron Gate if my sword is entirely out to the side, all the way to straight forward. It's still Iron Gate if I'm straight forward with my right side, and it's all the way over. The only time it changes is if I cross my hands. On your left side, if you are right-handed, that means that this is no longer Iron Gate. Once it starts turning back, it turns into a different guard that we're not going to worry about right now. So your Iron Gate, instead, if you wish to take it off more to your left side, the pommel will rotate out and connect to your hip. So, Iron Gate on my left, Iron Gate on my right. And same thing again, if it goes beyond, it is no longer Iron Gate. Now, this guard is going to be good for doing its namesake. You can defend anywhere in between those 2 points of your feet. So if I am standing left foot forward, right, narrow or wide, I am able to accurately defend everywhere in between those 2 feet. Same thing on the other side, without difficulty. So regardless of what orientation I am with the opponent, if I'm standing very narrowly, this is the only time I need to worry. Otherwise, if you're here, I can fight you. If you're here, I can fight you. Not a problem. If we're dead on, still no issue. It's only when they start to get to the outside of your foot that you have problems. Now, your basic actions are going to be 2. The first way you can do this is you can parry with your tip down, which is going to be to bring your hands up and catch with them either crossed or uncrossed. It is usually best to catch with uncrossed if you are standing right foot forward, and with crossed if you are standing left foot forward. The second way of parrying is to beat. There are two ways of beating. You can bring the sword up and basically do a small cut, but this with the express intent of keeping it relatively low. You can also bring the sword up and beat with the back edge, which will cause it to go higher. So either up again from your left, or more downward from your right. These are not meant to be parries that you hold. Something comes in, I will knock it aside and cut. Something comes in, I will knock it aside and cut or thrust. And then something comes in, I will step out and cut. Something comes in, I will step out and cut. This is your basic. It also leads me very well into the next category, which is going to be talking about, well, we'll hold off on parries. We'll come to that in a second. We'll move up on the body now to point forward or defensive guards. Now, defense is meant to be thought of more as passive defense in this category, because we do still have a parries section. So, passive defense, meaning that these are the guards you take when you are encroaching on distance, trying to figure out what your opponent is going to do, or when you are trying to leave distance or keep someone from getting closer to you. They are point forward. The first and easiest, regardless of which foot is forward, is here, essentially short point. Now, for this, it is standard extension with either foot forward. Just pull your arms back so that they're hovering just a little bit in front of your stomach. The reason that we're going for this is that way people don't go for our hands. If you start standing too extended, especially if you're standing right foot forward, this becomes a huge target. Just remember to keep it back and you're safe. Now, short point needs to be a lively tip. Anytime I move my feet, my tip is moving also at the same time. It being centralized means that I'm not committed to a side and I'm not betraying what I want to do. Attacking out of this guard is relatively weak. So while I can launch a thrust at any point, or I can make small cuts, this is generally meant to be just about warding people off or starting to learn information about them. Our next guard, you're just going to move your pommel over to your dominant hip. Now, for this can do the same thing that short point can do, and this is plow, flug, right? Just it's a one for one in regards to what it does in regards to the German system. But all this does is allow me now to use that power of my hip to project my thrust out. Rather than just being extension, by having it lined up with my hip, now I get the bonus of my arms uncrossing. If you're left-handed, this means that you move your point to your left side. This requires my left foot to be forward, which is not a bad habit for launching my attacks anyway. This kind of has some bleed over with the powerful positions we'll get to in a moment. The way I deliver my attacks is I just push out with extension, and if need be, I can step, and this will also lead into the ability to then cut or then work. Now, you can also parry from here. If an attack comes in on the low line or someone's going for your hands, pull that pommel back to your hip and it will protect them. So I'm in short point, regardless of which side forward, right? Pull it back. If I'm the other way, pull it back. We'll come back to this guy in a moment. My final one, and one that it's more of an option, and it's not necessarily meant to be all that crazy. It's really just to add some difference. And the only reason I'm going for it is because of gear restriction. So I built my forearm guards expressly around the idea of being able to cross my hands up high in Ox/Fenestra. However, not everyone has the ability to do that at first, or even later. And furthermore, not everyone immediately has the strength to properly fight from here. Now, you should build up to that, but as a stopgap, you can achieve the same thing from Schlussel. Now, the only reason I'm going with this is just because it achieves the exact same idea. All this allows me to do is do another option on a slightly higher line. If I want to also, for performing this thrust, I can push forward as I lift my hands in more of a straight line thrust. So I can uncork, or I can lift, both of which are pretty good as simple attacks. This has no parrying capacity whatsoever. Can, however, be good as a further branch from defending your hand. So if I'm standing in short point and someone tries to take my hands, I can either pull it back to flug, or I can pull it back to Schlussel with a retreat. This is also very good if they're trying to get you to commit so they can hit this arm. Pull them both back with a little retreat, and it's harder to hit that. This is also pretty good for just general denying. This does not cost me anything to stand here. It's pretty easy to stand here generally, and I can deceive with my range. So I'm including, not to mention as well, this is also subtly based around the idea of fighting in partial armor, no lie, and I may do a follow-up video where I showcase this. You can't do a good Ox/Fenestra in that much armor. This you can though, but I digress. So, those are our point forward guards. Short point, either foot forward, doesn't matter, the hands are just back. Plow, flug, preferably on your dominant side. We'll come back to non-dominant in a minute. And then key, Schlussel, again on your dominant side. Now, next up are going to be my powerful guards, moving up in the body. For my powerful guards, these are going to be ones where I am loaded to cut. Now there are three main kinds of powerful we have, and it's based upon the same couple load points. So what a load point is it's usually meant to be, in regards to your body, it's either hip, either shoulder, and then kind of the opening on either side of your head are your main powerful points, which is just the shoulder extended upward. And then finally, right at the crown. In theory, also your central line, but we're talking about cuts, really. So, for those, the ones that I want you going for are going to be, once you raise your hands directly above your head, you can cut powerfully from your left, you can cut powerfully straight down, or you can cut powerfully from your right, technically speaking, regardless of footwork. I recommend that you have, if you're up above the head, you should focus on being somewhat deceptive with here. The idea being that if I'm left foot forward and my sword is up, then the most powerful thing to do would be to bring it to my right side and then cut down with a passing step of my right. However, I'm also perfectly capable of cutting from my left without a step forward because my hips are still lined up like they were in the Iron Gate. Basically everything Iron Gate does defensive-wise, up high here in, well, high guard, Oberhut, right, does everything offensive-wise. Can move it here, can cut. Here, cut. Here, cut, just I will prefer to step. And then regardless of feet, everything is also true on the other side. Now, that's the first and simplest load point. That's really good for just earnest cuts that are meant to make my opponent work. Make them do a hard, dedicated parry that I can then do other things from. My second load points are going to be on either shoulder. Now, there's two ways of going on the shoulder. There's linear, and then there's wide. We're going to focus on wide at first. Reason being is I want you to be able to comfortably flow between them and not get stuck down the middle line. So for this, place the sword not on, but on your right shoulder so that it's back. And the idea being here, I can cut and put it onto my left shoulder. Cut, put it onto my right shoulder. And with this earnest cueing, basically from the guard of the lady / Zornhut, but I will simply continue to refer to it as the shoulder, I can very easily perform good, wide cuts that keep my hands back and are naturally using my core. Even if you don't know how to do a volte stable, which is what I'm adding to this is still not necessarily a bad mechanic to learn how to do, and is way better than the caveat, which is standing linearly or small. Now, this load works great on your right side if you're right-handed. It does not work so great on your left side. This is to be thought of in the same way that this and this were. It's all about me being able to play straight down the middle, pretty much, with a right-handed cut. Well, this is great if my entire purpose is to cut from point A to point B as efficiently as possible. But most times when you're working on, kind of more entry-level longsword, that's not what people are giving you, and or they're not listening to you. So I do advocate you worry more about the wider cuts, and it's only when that opportunity really presents itself that you go down the middle. The other reason is because this is very easy to get stuck in. This feels comfortable, it feels safe, and depending upon who's teaching you, you may do this a lot. But in my interpretation of a lot of this is a temporary position I take and use. You'll often hear me, if you watch any sparring footage, you'll hear me say use it or lose it. This is that. Use it for its purpose, or don't be standing in it. And don't get caught here. Better to be here where you at least have the ability to move on a wider angle than here where you're stuck being pretty weak / very specialized. So for our powerful positions, you have your crown, right? Which is all up above where all the load points are there, where I can cut from either side, regardless of which foot is forward. Inverse of Iron Gate. Next I have both of my shoulders, where I may cut through freely. And then finally I have my central load point, which is my dominant shoulder and my chest. There's technically one other variation that we can do this that you can experiment around with, which is take your powerful up high and just put your tip forward. Now the only thing we're doing from here is now I can add a little bit of extra momentum by cutting from my wrist. You will find this happen somewhat naturally, especially if you are parrying with the strong when you cut from the iron gate. Now, our final category of guards is going to be parries. Now, these can also still be used as just guards, but I don't recommend you do so. Reason being is they're meant to be positions you move through to something else. So, our parries are 3, basically. Right foot forward if you are right-handed, low, hands uncrossed. This is basically long point, also essentially flug on the other side, plow on your left. The reason we're treating this as a parry rather than initial engagement guard is because from here, nothing really great comes out. I can thrust, sure, I can cut, but it doesn't have the same amount of power when I put my hip into it as it does from my right side because my hands are not crossed. Even if I train perfectly symmetrically, it's just never going to be the same. Better instead is this guard for defending very comfortably at varying heights, varying distances, and it costs me nothing to stand here, which is why, again, people usually get stuck standing here. So in the event that someone cuts in at this side, regardless of what position you are in, you may often find yourself cutting down into it, moving across from it, or even, again, kind of cutting down into it / forming it with a cut-like motion. This defends everything that could come here. This can also be projected somewhat forward in a bit more of a long point / scales, kind of depends. But what it shouldn't be turned into is something that you stand in. It should just be ting, deal with it, or preferably moving with it, and then you're on to your next action. Your second parry is going to be the hanging point. This is held on your left side. The reason being is that you can hold it on your right side. The issue being, if your protective gear or your armor does not allow you to cross your arms, you've got problems. The benefit of holding it on your left is that you can do that regardless of your hand protection, and also, this locks down the line that most people cut strongly from. If I'm fighting a right-handed fencer, and I stand like this, I've locked down their most immediate cut. Now, downside of that is they're probably going to do something tricksy, but we don't need to worry about that right now. We're just dealing with bare bone basics. Let your tip droop slightly off to your right side. So essentially I've got shoulder point, actual point, and then my hand. I should keep my tip somewhat lively. I should not just stand here drooping. If I'm moving into this, it's to guard the head, and then if they go around that, guard the body. 1, 2, 1, 2. Very simplistic, deals with everything on your right side. This can also be used to deal with things coming toward, everything on your left side. This can also deal with things coming toward your right, but be cautious. If something does come toward my right, I don't just move my tip. I always move my tip and my foot. Now, what this is, it's not a new position. It's, I was facing this guy, the cut's coming in on my right. Essentially all I do is I take my guard and I move it so I'm facing you. This ensures in relation to where that guy was going, I've locked this down. This can be taken moving in pretty much any direction. Usually you want to be moving back out of it with it, so ting, ting, guard, move. You shouldn't try to attack out of it unless you are moving into the parry, as by the time you power forward, it's a strong cut, but it won't reach as far as your dominant side. The same is not necessarily true when you are able to cross your arms. From here, as we talked about before, I can reach pretty far. So, to go over our parries one more time, you have flug / Longsword, right, long point, which can be extended or not. Just lining up my dominant side, a lot of your actions will go here. You have hanging point, which also most of your actions coming from below or just guarding your head will take you here. And then finally, you have hanging point in the manner of the right, which guards you a little better there. Now there may be an instance where you have to instead parry over into flug / kind of moving through fenestra, etc. But it's the same basic idea, just within this window will keep you pretty safe. So those are the guards to really sum it up. You've got your low guards, your mid guards, your powerful guards, and then, low, defensive, powerful, and then you have your parries. The only thing that we haven't talked about is your attacks, because frankly your attacks are going to be very simple. If you're in a powerful guard, launch a cut. If you are in a loaded point forward guard, launch a thrust. Otherwise, everything will take you into a position that you either move through a powerful guard, which teaches you to cut, or puts you into an extended guard, which teaches you to thrust. As long as you follow that, you're generally going to be pretty okay. And as far as their defensive options against that, let's say, for example, I'm in Iron Gate, an attack comes in, I deal with it, I am now in a point forward guard, I thrust in response to it, they push my blade aside, this moves me into a powerful guard, so my next action is to cut. Keep your distance with this, and it will kind of naturally chain back into itself, and every time you do manage to hit, regardless of what it be, if you thrust, retract back, or retract back. If you cut, retract back, or retract back on your other side. Especially if you land the cut from your left, which is likely, your next action is to come back so your hands are crossed where they need be. The only thing that this system will not give you is full detail on the footwork, but moving through these should promote you to step relatively widely, which is a little bit of adjustment step in keeping whichever foot you need forward to be powerful. You shouldn't have much difficulty in that regard. As far as things more complicated than that, I will omit them. This shouldn't be anything new if you're relatively experienced, and odds are your just baseline when you pick up sword and play with it probably has some overlap with this. I've just given it a little bit more formation and or it's slightly indicative of my own bias. But regardless, if you're moving up in the world and starting to do more full body, and it seems like there's just so much and you can't drill it down, try this, see if it helps. And not to lie, if you're also having a particularly bad day and you do know more techniques, there are days I'll just limit myself to this, and it goes a lot further because there's nothing complicated. I'm always in one of those positions, and I do this response afterwards. And it's only when my opponent does things more advanced or more correctly that I find I fail. So, that is a basic guide to, entry-level full-body longsword. I don't have anything really snappy to refer to with this series. I will probably do this with other weapons to give just a kind of baseline. I'll call it like common fence or something like that. I don't know. Leave suggestions if you have a good idea for the name of this series. But either way, hopefully that was helpful, and thank you very much for watching. We'll go over some other techniques another time.